Well, the government has announced and indeed confirmed that there's going to be a constitutional convention reviewing the Eighth Amendment. That is the amendment that protects the right to life of the unborn child in this country. And there's going to be a review, presumably looking at whether the Eighth Amendment should be amended or repealed. And there's been a lot of discussion around this, especially around the time of the general election. So interesting backdrop at the time when the pro-life campaign are organising an event this weekend called Celebrate the Eighth. So they're contending that the Eighth Amendment is something that we should be celebrating. And on the line to tell us a little bit more about why they think this is the case, I have Liz McDermott, who's a spokesperson for the pro-life campaign. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning, Wendy. How are you?
Well, we'll talk a little bit about the event and why you decided to have it shortly. But first, I just wanted to ask you about that. The constitutional convention that the government has committed to having, where they're going to review the Eighth Amendment. What do you think about this?
Well, Wendy, it's very concerning. It's clearly, we can look back to 2013 when the last Citizens' Convention was held, and that resulted in the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act, which, as we all know, despite all the medical evidence that was put forward by experts within that Citizens' Convention, the information that came out of that said things like suicidal ideation and depression during pregnancy would not be solved by abortion, that abortion wasn't going to be a remedy for any of these kinds of difficulties during pregnancy. That information and advice was just ignored by the government, who went ahead and legislated for abortion during all 9 months of pregnancy for suicidal feelings. So it's very alarming that the government is going down this road again and, creating this illusion to the public that their voice is going to be heard, when even if it is, it seems like the government is on a one-track path only, and that the one result is that they want to repeal the Eighth Amendment and widen the door to much more abortion in this country.
But Liz, on that point, in terms of listening to the voices of the public, I mean, when we look at various different opinion polls, it does seem that there is an appetite for widening our abortion legislation to include for cases where, for example, the baby might survive very long after birth. And it seems to me that there does seem to be support for that from various different opinion polls. Do you accept that?
I wouldn't accept that at all, Wendy, because the opinion polls, the results of the opinion polls depend on really the wording of the questions being asked. And the concern is that in a lot of opinion polls carried out by people who are in favour of widening abortion are putting people towards an answer which would support their conclusions. The pro-life campaign, when it carries out its own opinion polls and words the question much more clearly, so that people fully understand what they're agreeing to, we're finding the opposite is true, is that most people don't want to have abortion, don't want wider abortion in this country. And the other point about that is that there's the population needs to be much better educated about the resources that are out there. We have this idea that a child with a life-limiting condition, is going to present, a very difficult situation for parents. But there's a growing awareness of supports like perinatal hospice care, and obstetricians and hospitals are in favour of this, of providing proper support and palliative care to parents, so that they don't have to face this agonising journey alone, and they're not presented with, abortion is really the only option here, because I think that's where a lot of people think in that situation, well, what else are you going to do, because there's no other support going to be there for you. Whereas, we need to create that environment where support is there, and that babies who have life-limiting conditions, who may not survive very long, nevertheless, the time that they have, their short lives and the time that they spend with their parents is valued and precious and honoured, really, and that their dignity as human beings is honoured, and that the families, the parents and the wider family can have these wonderful memories of that time spent together. And that's, in the pro-life campaign, we would see many stories of this kind of thing, where families have come together in a really, whenever it's a very painful and difficult situation, but how it provides really unexpected blessings and sort of an outpouring of love and support from the wider community. So what seems at a diagnosis stage early in the pregnancy as a very kind of bleak scenario and a bleak future for this particular little baby and their parents.
What about, Liz, the people who say that's really, really nice, and it's great to hear that there's supports in place in Ireland, but what's wrong with having the choice in that situation where parents can then decide which route they're going to take?
Well, unfortunately the choice often isn't there, and that's why the perinatal hospice care situation is very important to promote. But parents are telling us that so often they have to even change hospitals because they're coming under pressure to go down the abortion route when they're given a diagnosis like this. So choice is really an illusion. There's very often no choice, and the parents are saying, we didn't have a choice. So this idea that let's introduce abortion as an option and that will simply provide choice, that's wrong. That's not going to be the case. Once abortion is on the statute books, if that comes to be, and hopefully it won't, but if it is we see this from other countries, once it's on the statute books, the expectation is created that is the easiest thing for everybody else that a couple will choose. And so a pressure is brought to bear on them by hospitals, doctors, nurses, and everybody around them that abortion is how to deal with a difficult pregnancy or a life-limiting condition in a preborn baby. And that's not the case. Choice is really the last word it is. It's pressure and a bleak prospect for people whose babies, that's people's babies. And we have people like Tracy Harkin from Every Life Counts. We hear these stories all the time. They felt that they were unsupported and the babies were treated like they weren't even hardly human at all because they should just be discarded, just get it over with now. That's not the message that the pro-life campaign wants to put out, and it's not the way that the Irish people have approached life. We've always been very open to life and open to family and support, and we don't expect everybody to be perfect and unblemished and so on. And we want to say, and this is part of what we're doing with the event this Saturday, to celebrate the Eighth Amendment, that Ireland values all members of its human family. We're all together, and we support and affirm every human life in this country, and we want to make that point very strongly to the government, which is now seeming to want to go down this route of opening the door to abortion.
In terms of the event then this Saturday, Liz, obviously we hear on one side people saying repeal the 8th. This event this Saturday is saying celebrate the 8th. Tell us a little bit about what's going to happen at the event and why you feel the event should be, or the 8th should be celebrated. Well,
it's going to be a great event, Wendy. There's a fantastic lineup. We have two mainline speakers, one of whom is a lady called Melissa Oden, and she's an American lady, and she's actually a survivor of abortion. In 1977, her life was, supposed to end through a saline abortion, and she was simply discarded and left for dead. But a nurse heard her crying and actually picked her up, and her life was spared and saved, and she thrived, and she is now coming to speak to us as a survivor of abortion herself, and also she speaks very much for the voiceless, the babies like her who were attempts were made to take away their lives. She now has set up an abortion survivors network, and she's connecting with other survivors of abortion, and already in the couple of years that she's set up this network, she's been contacted by over 200 other survivors of abortion. So that's another story that we need to hear, that people do survive abortion, and their lives thankfully are here, and they're here to tell their stories. But it might have been that her life would have been missed, and she's now a wife and mother herself, and very much a campaigner for people also who've had abortions, because she has reconnected with her birth family and so on, So she's going to be speaking to us and tell us her story. We also have Heidi Crowther, who's a teenager from the UK who has Down syndrome, and she is speaking to us as a disability rights campaigner, because there's a new sort of pre-birth test called to screen for Down syndrome, which Heidi and others are very concerned is going to increase the already horrendous rate of 9 out of 10 Down syndrome babies being aborted in the UK. And Heidi is going to speak to us as a disability rights campaigner as part of the Don't Screen Us Out campaign. So as a mother of a disabled child myself, I'm really excited to hear her story and her testimony and her fight really for her own community of Down syndrome people. So they're the two mainline speakers who are coming on Saturday, and this is going to be a joyful and thankful event where we give thanks for the 8th Amendment, because as a result of it we have thousands and thousands of people in our country who are alive because of it. So we have to be thankful for it. And it's a very positive and, as I say, joyful event, and we're hoping that many people will come along, even people who are a little bit on the fence and not sure what they should believe about abortion, and they don't like to be seen to judge. We would say come along and hear these stories and see the level of support in this country for the 8th Amendment and for life. It's a really important message, and it's going to be a great day. Obviously, the weather is going to be in our favour, and that's fantastic. So we're really expecting a fun day, lots of positive stories, lots of opportunities to meet and hear many people who have life-affirming stories, and that we send a very strong message to our government that we do not want the 8th Amendment to be repealed. Well,
Liz McDermott of the Pro-Life Campaign, thank you so much for joining us on the programme this morning. And if you want to find out more about the event, the website is celebratethe8th.ie. And as Liz mentioned there, on the particular issue, I suppose it's good to hear both sides. It's good to hear all the stories, isn't it?